No problem. No problem. Sorry about that.
No worries. Well, good
Did that
afternoon,
work? Yeah.
everybody, and welcome to the July edition of the National At-Home Dad Network's webinar series. Today, we have with us Brian Heilman from Promundo. He's a longtime friend and admirer of the National At-Home Dad Network. He's attended and given keynote presentations at the Home Dad Cons in Portland, Oregon, as well as Minneapolis, Minnesota. He is the co-author of the recently released 2021 State of the World's Fathers Report, which brings particular focus this time around our governments and our government institutions, asking them to do more to support fathers and the equal care work at home that we do. I'm sure that that whole world changed a little bit this year with the pandemic and more dads realizing exactly how much goes into doing home care of your kids. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Brian and let him give us a quick synopsis of what they found this year.
Totally. Thank you so much, Matt, and welcome to the other attendees here in the room and anybody watching over Facebook as well. I'm planning for this meeting to last about an hour. Does that seem right, Matt? Or how long have they
Yeah,
usually gone?
we
Cool. And
usually aim for about an hour with questions as
yep,
they come
perfect.
up.
Perfect. Yeah. And so I've got, maybe in the range of 15, 20 minutes worth of like presentation material to share, but I kind of thought that what I would do is go about it piece by piece and then see if we could engage in a little bit of conversation about each of the items, because certainly coming from the perspective of doing research on the world's fathers and fatherhood, worldwide, I'm curious, like how much of what goes into a report like this really resonates with the membership of National At-Home Dad Network, which parts of it feel particularly relevant to your lives in the US, in your families, in your locations, wherever you are, which parts of it seem, more related somewhere else around the world that's not as useful, and almost use this meeting as like a validity check for some of the advocacy messages that we're putting out in the world. So we'll see how that goes, if folks are willing to speak up and share their personal experiences or not. And yeah, just see how it goes from there. And then, if it's easier for me to just answer questions, I'm happy to do that as well. So I'm going to jump back into my screen share. I do have a presentation, but as we start to talk, maybe I'll do a little bit of like, show the screen, turn the screen off, show the screen, turn the screen off. So, in the past, like Matt said, I've presented at Home Dad Con about a prior report we did called State of America's Fathers. That was about 4 or 5 years ago now at this point, and focus a lot more on the particular policy debates happening in the US. But we haven't been able to, get funding for a second edition of that report. So every 2 years, we've still continued to do this global report. And this year, we really thought, as you see on the subtitle at the bottom, structural solutions. Now, that's kind of, policy wonk speak or social science speak. But what we really felt after a lot of editions of this report was maybe even we, as authors or as a community focused around fathers, are focusing a little bit too much even on the individual level, or we're doing that thing where, to make a comparison, we're making the climate change conversation all about whether like individuals, turn their lights off at night or use paper straws instead of plastic straws, or like these teeny little individual level things, when the real issue happens at a much bigger national level. Like our governments, our corporations are the ones doing millions and millions of times more to add carbon into the atmosphere rather than what we can save by driving a Prius and using a paper straw or something. So we wanted to bring that same perspective. Like, to what extent are we putting too much blame or too much responsibility just on individual dads, individual families, when really we need our governments to step up and be much more aggressive and generous around how they're pushing toward equality of care work in the home and supporting fathers to step more and more into that care work, very much the way that, the membership of this group has already been role modeling for many years. So that's the general idea. How can we like punch up as it were, and call on the governments to do more, as Matt said in the intro. So, and even though the report is titled around fathers, it's not as if we're just only care about men, only care about fathers. Really, the ultimate goal is to promote equality of care work and really put care as an ethos in the center of policymaking and center of our conversations. And how would we define that? Care is the individual as well as the common ability to provide political, social, material, and emotional conditions that allow people to thrive and allow the planet to thrive. So we really go forward with a definition of care at the heart of the report that goes beyond only caring for an infant, that goes beyond only childcare. Of course, childcare tends to be a big component of this conversation, but what about the care that we all do for our romantic partners, for our siblings, for our elderly parents, even for the community we live in? And I think a lot of that came up in the COVID era, where mutual aid and just how can you support your neighbors when they need help? How can you look after your neighbors by not wantonly, spreading your bacteria everywhere? That kind of care. Care for sick and elderly members of our families in our communities. So just to put that framing out there, this isn't only a parenting or parenting infants kind of focus. We're looking at everything that y'all do as fathers, partners, brothers, husbands, sons, and so on. And we're counting that as care. So previous editions of this report were pretty data heavy, and we often did our own new data collection. And I apologize to anyone out there who's tunes into a Promundo presentation specifically to get more numbers. There's not going to be a ton of numbers this time around because, like I said, we really tried to punch upward and look more at those structural factors. But still, there are some snapshots here where we can look at some numbers. And again, I'm not trying to discount the way that the men in this particular group are certainly contributing equally within their families. But when you look globally, all the countries around the world, it's still a very important advocacy point for us to say that there just simply isn't equality in the unpaid care work between men and women worldwide. The global numbers suggest that you can see here that by a factor of 3, so that means 300%, women are still doing more, spending more time on unpaid care work on a daily basis than men are. And also, when you look at how that impacts children, even that girls age 5 to 14 are spending 3.5 times as much time on this unpaid care work than boys are. So that's also to kind of suggest to folks like you all who identify as stay-at-home dads, who identify as caregivers, how you're still kind of on this vanguard, on this, you're pioneers really of a more equal family mode that really isn't that common worldwide, let alone in the US. We also continue to emphasize that it's not as if there's anywhere in the world where this happens, really, that there's no countries where we can really demonstrate that time spent on unpaid care work between men and women has really equal. And also, again, keeping that final point here, keeping the punching up, the structural view in mind, we can't identify any country that makes it their explicit national level policy goal to achieve this. So these are some of the statistics that continue to urge us to write this report and focus on equal care and know that we haven't really achieved it yet, unfortunately.
I was going to say, I
But
don't
then,
think it's that surprising that we're finding
yeah,
that, men aren't doing that equal amount of work.
right.
In the National At-Home Dad Network, we know that we are not the quote unquote societal norm in
Yeah,
family structures.
yeah,
More and more dads are taking over as primary caregivers every year, but
yeah.
it's still nowhere near a 50-50 breakdown.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, like a lot of us, we want our I can't speak for everyone, and of course, there's all different kinds of families, but it doesn't even necessarily mean that what we want is a complete flip where like all men should be primary caregivers. What we're looking for is equality and sharing, and what equality looks like from one family to the next, and even from one period of your life as a family to the next might look really different, but that's perfectly fine. Even in my case, my wife is about to start graduate school, and I know that when she's there, I'm going to have to pick up a lot more of the cooking and cleaning and picking up more work around the house, even, to the extent that maybe those ones I'm doing the majority, but she's doing the majority of other things. And it doesn't mean that the image I always use is like, in order to be equal, it doesn't mean that both you and your partner both have your fingers on the spoon of food feeding the child at the same time. Of course, you do different tasks. But and probably that even means that a lot of us want to have, career goals as well as family goals. And how can we all be allowed to do that and not be constrained by the gender norms? Let's focus for a little bit then, of course, on the COVID of it all. This is like undeniably the major overarching story of this last period that this report is trying to look at. And I don't want to go through every single one of these numbers because I want to give space for you all to reflect. But the data around COVID and care work is suggesting that, to the extent that folks were under lockdown or quarantine orders worldwide, they're in the home more often. Of course, that meant an increase in the amount of care work that just simply needed to happen. There was all the memes and all the conversations about running the dishwasher 3 times a day, and oh my God, how many dishes need to be done? And many folks stepping into the role of being at work as well as being a teacher and a childcare provider all at once in ways that didn't happen before. And as you can see, both men and women are reporting that like the amount of work happening increased, and that's not a big shock. But in some sense, it's kind of important and socially, useful that many, many men are contributing more care work during this time as a result of a response to the pandemic. And that, you see the second kind of category of numbers in the lighter blue there, where that includes also the time spent caring for older family members. And, we were trying to look out for our older family members who were at more risk of the more severe range of consequences from COVID, and children as well. Now, even though we saw, this is kind of the duality of these statistics, and you always have to allow things to have two truths at the same time. We're really encouraged that so many men were doing more work in general, and that's certainly true. But at the same time, we didn't find that the real ratio of work during COVID was shifting all that much. We didn't find that like all of a sudden magically, because couples were at home together, that then everything became equal. Most respondents felt that, sure, he's doing more, but I, as the woman in the family, I'm also doing like even more of more, disproportionately. So we wanted to keep that reality in mind as we looked through this. Just one piece of research during the COVID era in the US specifically says this, that during this crisis, many millions of men are on a form of forced paternity leave. Even while women carry a higher burden during the crisis, it's still highly likely that we'll see a sizable impact of this forced experiment on the social norms around care work and ultimately on gender equality in the near future. So it's encouraging to see even these fancy bureaus of research reflect on that. So I don't know if, how many folks are here in the room or feel like speaking up, but what were if you have any little anecdotes to share about how care work changed in your own homes as a result of COVID, I'd love to hear them and see if you validate these trends or not.
Well,
I know we've only got a couple in the
couple of
room.
people that have joined us that are in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm keeping an eye on the typed questions that are popping
Sure.
into our Facebook feed.
Cool.
I can only speak to my own experience, which might be different from most people. My wife is a physician,
Mm-hmm.
and she actually works in the emergency department of a major hospital.
Oh,
So
wow.
the biggest difference that we
So,
saw
yeah.
in our house was that she wasn't home nearly as much as she used to be.
Right. Oh,
Um,
wow. Okay. So it's
little
almost a
things
reverse.
like her having to go into work early so that she could change clothes, go into the
Mm,
ED, then fully scrub out of the ED, put clean
mm,
clothes back on
mm-hmm,
because she couldn't come home and shower because at the time my son was 3 and there's
mm.
no way I'm going to keep a 3-year-old from running up and like embracing mommy the second she
Sure.
walks in the door.
Sure.
So there was a period in there in the beginning where she was probably averaging 10 to 12-hour days,
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
as opposed to her normal, like 8 to 9.
Mm-hmm.
But
Dang.
But, luckily, me being a stay-at-home dad, handling distance kindergarten at the end of last year,
Hmm.
and an entire year of distance first grade wasn't as bad as it was for a lot of other families, because
Hmm.
I wasn't trying to work from home.
Sure.
My big challenge
Sure.
was keeping a 3-year-old occupied while
Yeah.
keeping her focused on school. But we found a rhythm eventually.
Cool. Yeah.
You
I mean,
know,
it sounds like, yeah, yeah, Matt, I mean, to hear you say how your partner was out of home even more than in prior periods, I think speaks to the healthcare experience, but sort of different from the maybe the national trend for other families.
well, I
Yeah, well,
know I know I saw a lot.
hmm,
Last year doing the distance first grade, like all of the other parents out there, I got to see a Zoom window view of the life of all of my
yeah,
daughter's, like, classmates.
yeah,
And it was quite surprising. My daughter's class had 16 students in it,
uh-huh,
and out of the 16 students, not counting myself, there were at least three, if not four, other kids who dad was the primary person helping with
cool.
school.
Yeah, okay.
They might have been working from home, so they weren't like
Hmm.
next to him the whole time, but like when
Hmm.
questions came up, dad popped in.
Yeah,
However, the majority was still mom.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a reflection of the dynamics we're talking about here, definitely. More and more men, but still not equal. Like both the trend is positive, but the destination hasn't been achieved yet. Totally. Well, I appreciate you, Matt, jumping in. I wonder if like a lot of this might be a conversation between the two of us, but I'll find that fun all the same. I saw there's still one other person on the call, but and maybe even I'll tune in in the coming days onto the Facebook feed, and if questions
Hmm.
come up in comments, I can kind of reply there. But let
Well,
me
one of the
let's keep.
things that we do with our webinars is that we do record all of them live.
Cool.
Not only do we broadcast them on Facebook, but after the event is over, we'll upload everything to our YouTube page,
Oh, great.
because most stay-at-home parents, blocking out an hour of your day
Yeah.
to stare at a screen is pretty difficult
Yeah,
to
I
do.
wondered about that. I wondered about that. Like, will we have some kids joining us on lunchtime? Or like, did we
Don't be
strategically plan
surprised
this
if one
around
of mine
naps?
jumps in the middle of this.
Cool. Well, thanks for juggling. Um, okay, so I know we're about 20 minutes in, so let's keep moving to make sure we get through everything and have time for conversation. Like I said, the report is about structures. It's looking upward, not just about blaming, and calling on individuals so much. And we put forward seven main actions, seven main categories of recommendations for those policymakers and shapers of our societies. I'm going to go through them one by one. Won't go in tons of depth in order to have conversation. And then, yeah, hopefully we'll get some reflections on some of these. The very first one, I'll maybe move quickly through because in some sense, this is the overarching action that we've suggested. We want our governments to actually take care as its own policy priority. So not just parental leave or not just something about education or something about, cash transfers. What if there were a national policy that put equal care and validating the importance of care to our economy and our thriving of our lives as its own policy goal? And in fact, in the US anyway, it's interesting because we're getting closer maybe than we ever have before, where suddenly there's, the tax credit, there's $300 per month payment for each child you have. And I'd love to hear if anyone have like gotten those payments in your bank account yet or what you felt about that. And also in the, at least the initial version of President Biden's infrastructure package was talking about care and our caregivers, both professional and unpaid, as a core part of what the infrastructure of a healthy society looks like. And that was kind of an encouraging step that thought, okay, maybe somebody out there is listening to these advocacy messages over time. But really the components that would make up the national care policy sort of come in the subsequent six actions. So if it's okay, I'll kind of just move quickly. Um, there'll be no surprise that action number two and another emphasis uh, of all of our world's fathers advocacy is around parental leave. Here in the US, we're, probably all of you here know this, but we're one of just a couple countries worldwide that don't, as a matter of government policy, provide guaranteed job protected paid leave for mothers, let alone fathers. And I think this is just kind of shameful in the global environment that we don't even look out for the folk. We don't look out for our new parents, regardless of their gender, let alone folks who are going through the physical experience of childbirth. And this continues to be a shame for us. But also, as we look worldwide, we have a long, long way to go. This is a snapshot globally where, you go from the most red as the worst to kind of the most blue as the most positive situation, where there is at least some entitlement of a paid leave for parents of all genders. But even in a majority of these blue country cases here on this map, the amount of time offered to mothers really far exceeds the time offered to fathers. And, the kind of highest standards of these policies, where we'd really love to see a certain allotment of days that are specifically for the father or the second parent, if such that those days are not just kind of like up for grabs for either parent. A lot of countries put forward like, this is the amount of time for the mother, and then there's kind of like extra bonus days that could be taken by either parent. But then, not surprisingly, the majority of those days just get taken by the mother, and it continues the same social norms. And just to add in a point here too, just we're really behind worldwide in terms of making sure these policies speak to families of all varieties. So same-sex couples, and really putting in language about a second parent, regardless of gender, and not just baking in a sort of heteronormative framework in this leave policies would be part of the
Absolutely.
goal. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know, Matt or anyone, I guess a lot of folks here took the decision to be primary caregivers, maybe above and beyond parental leave from a workplace or government provided. But
Well,
did you
what's
take advantage of
interesting,
this? Or yeah, go ahead.
we actually have somebody that commented on Facebook.
Oh,
David
cool.
said that the pandemic gave him sort of an excuse to formalize being an at-home parent.
Cool. Yeah.
For him and his wife, it was where they were probably heading eventually,
Hmm.
but the extra challenges of losing the childcare options as the
Hmm.
pandemic shut down, preschools and the rest of it, kind
Hmm.
of pushed him to take that plunge at home.
Hmm.
One of our other guys, Brock, was pointing out that his wife helped as much as she could during the day,
Hmm.
but really not a whole lot changed because she was still doing her job just from
Right.
home.
Right. Yeah.
And, him being an at-home dad, like he was already used to doing most of the laundry and the cleaning and taking care of the kids already.
Hmm.
So for a lot of our families, it may not have been as much of a shock as it was to some of the others.
Sure. Sure.
As far as the child tax credit, we have one person that said they were supposed to get it, but they haven't seen it yet.
Okay.
Oddly enough, I think my wife and I got it,
Hmm.
but due to the sliding income scale, it was a relatively small amount,
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
which
Yeah. Fair
honestly
enough.
we're okay with.
Hmm.
We came out of this pandemic, relatively well. With
Sure.
my wife working in emergency medicine, obviously her workload didn't diminish.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
we didn't necessarily look towards any of the money that was being handed out for stimulus and assistance and the rest of it because we were doing okay.
Sure.
But
Sure.
for the people who needed it, it was great that it was there.
Yeah.
And I think they just automatically sent us the child tax thing.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, and this is a good segue to action number three. And honestly, like, I'm sure in any of my prior presentations to Home Dad Con, the idea that the US government would just provide straight up cash transfers to the majority of citizens would have seemed like complete fantasy. And that's what Action 3 is talking about. Social protection programs is kind of the sociology speak for, cash transfers or direct actions by the government to like uphold the financial reality of families. And a lot of cases, these are actually pretty popular or common worldwide, but often they're, as we might expect, they reflect some of the same gender norms and social norms. There are a lot of they're called conditional cash transfer programs worldwide. And the conditions that you have to qualify are, that perhaps you keep your children in school up through a certain age in a country where children are dropping out of school too early. And if you do that, then your family will receive a certain amount of money, things like that. But pretty much always in our global scan of these, it's gendered. The money goes directly to a mother with the presumption that she, of course, is the primary caregiver, or even sometimes the presumption that she will use the money more responsibly than a man in the family would. And again, there's probably some little bit of truth to this, but it's also reinforcing the division of labor between the genders. Now, the fascinating thing is now, the impossible happened. And for those, the vast majority of families in the US, there were, at least those couple waves of pandemic stimulus funding. And now there is, possibly in perpetuity, a monthly child tax credit. And this is really a breakthrough in the US policy environment anyway. And I wonder, I mean, I heard from you, Matt, and I really appreciate you saying, look, we were doing fine anyway, but if there are any membership, whether listening now or in the future, for whom those payments really made a big difference, I'd love to hear a little, anecdote about what that meant. I think by a global standard, actually, the stimulus amounts that went to families in the US by comparison to a lot of other, higher income Western European countries was actually quite low. You have countries in Western Europe with 1,000 or 2,000 euros per month. And I think even in Canada was much higher as well. But yeah,
again,
did that make a difference for you?
Most of your European countries and Canada as well don't have the. I'm trying to find the right words for it.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have the political baggage that comes
Yeah.
with anything that could be looked at as a
Yeah.
social program.
Yeah.
That has become a political word and a charged word in our
Yeah.
environment. And
Yeah.
it really shouldn't be, because
Right.
there's so many things that we do that are social programs in this country,
Mm-hmm.
from maintaining the interstate system to the public schools to all kinds of things. So
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
again, it's just kind of a buzzword, so there's always a pushback. One of the other dads talked about one of the big changes that came for his family with the pandemic was that they went from having their kids in Montessori school to bringing them home to do homeschooling.
Okay. Yeah.
At the start of the pandemic, and he said they just stuck with it. To
Cool.
which I say, Jonathan, kudos to you.
Yeah.
I have determined that I have neither the ability nor demeanor to homeschool. I am quite looking forward to the in-person school starting again in the fall.
Sure.
Wood.
Yeah. And both of your kids are school-going age, Matt, or
Well,
all
my,
of your
my
kids?
son was supposed to do his first year of preschool last year, but we just delayed that.
Okay.
So he will be starting in pre-K next year,
Mm-hmm.
and my daughter is going into second grade. So I'll have like half a day without kids for the first time in almost 8 years.
Yeah, time for those bike rides and triathlon practice.
Just when the housework would be a good start.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we have 4 actions to go, 3 down, 4 to go. And I hope, this conversation is proving fruitful in the moment and in the future. The 4th category, and I'd just be interested to hear again, folks' reflections, we're calling on health sector institutions to just be a more welcoming environment for fathers' involvement. And again, not to reify these same gender norms where there sometimes can be a presumption that anything having to do with parenthood, antenatal care, childbirth, early child vaccination appointments, and just like all of the various elements of medical care for children or for elderly members would be handled by a woman in the family. And I just wonder if anyone here has ever had an experience of kind of being looked at askance or in a healthcare environment, whether leading up to birth of a child or thereafter, where you sort of felt like the health environment kind of just wasn't ready for you, or you felt a little alienated there, or it was just clear that this environment was expecting a female parent. Does that resonate?
Um, I know it's a fairly common
Yeah,
comment that you will see a whole lot
yeah.
on different platforms and on our Facebook pages and the rest of it.
Mm,
It's a lot of a discussion that we'll have at Home Dad Con and that type of thing.
hmm
It's fairly common. It does not matter how many times I list myself as the primary contact,
Yeah,
whether
yeah.
it's to the doctor's office or the school. It will
hmm
usually take at least two times of them trying to reach my wife at work
Wow,
before
yeah.
they finally realize, oh, wait, if we call him, he'll actually pick up the phone.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
exactly. Yeah.
and again, it bothers me. I mean, it does
hmm
on the one hand, but on the other hand, I really do kind of understand because for such a long period of time in this country, that
hmm
was the normal thing. The
hmm
teachers didn't say, I'm going to call your dad. It was, I'm going to call your mom. And Lord
hmm
knows I heard that enough as a child.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and so like when we're trying to like change our framing from, what should couples do? What should individuals do? That structural way that I was talking about, like look upward, look to the environment. What would be the destinations to really call on? This emerged as a strong one. Like there are, if our hospitals, antenatal care, our childbirth centers, and all the way expanding out to, yeah, like school nurses and everyone were to really institutionally and socially, culturally embrace an ethic of equality of care between parents, or really put faith in fathers as caregivers, that would be one of those structural changes that would really lead to this culture of care work we're looking at, even more so probably than whatever the equivalent of using a paper straw is, to use my analogy.
Well, another one of
So
our guys who's watching,
yeah,
Jonathan, he pointed out that you were talking about getting those side eye looks. He said, "Yeah,
yeah,
I'm a big bearded bald guy walking around with an 8-year-old girl. I get the
yeah,
looks all the time."
yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly.
luck at this point, having done this for 7 years, I'm a known quantity at my local parks now.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
in the beginning, the minute the kid ran off to go play by themselves, suddenly so many of the
hmm
moms at the park were giving you the eye of, wait a minute, is he here with a kid or is he just hanging out at the
Yeah,
park in the middle of the day?
yeah, yeah. And this
You
is
know,
kind of the like gross legacy that we sort of have to carry as men because of the bad behaviors of other men, and just like the macho gender norms that have existed in society. But like at an individual basis, when you're trying to be a part of a more positive reality, it's pretty hard to, and frustrating to have to, yeah, be the face of that, or get those, yeah, unjust looks. So I appreciate, Jonathan, you sharing that, and I'm sorry that that continues to be your experience. Hopefully, over time, you make buddies with some of the other parents, regardless of gender, at the park, and feel a little bit more
keep pushing
comfortable.
it. The moms will accept you eventually.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. I really appreciate all the input, you guys. I just love this group. I really do. I always had a great time at Home Dad Con, and I just think like it's, for me, you have to realize it's so fortunate to get out of this like policy wonk researchy space and just actually hear from dads. And of course, we do that to a certain extent in the conducting the research for a study like this one, but it's so much more activating to hear the real life examples, as opposed to, yeah, just writing policy proposals in PDF. So I just really appreciate everyone who's taking time to be here. Few more to go. Action 5 is really speaking to more of like the social environment, social norms aspect of this, and even how our children from an early age in school start to be exposed to the rigid binary definitions of gender and gender roles. And so we want to, wherever we can, even in school curricula, in the kinds of TV shows that our children are watching, and just friend groups and peer groups and social interactions, start to just make it seem more visible and more normal that men have a capacity to care, that they are doing so as parents, as siblings, as partners, as children, and just change the examples that are showing up in textbooks, change the example, get rid of all of the stupid commercials where the dad is like hapless about changing a diaper or making dinner or whatever, which are annoyingly still common. And just like, yeah, so that the water we're all swimming in is supportive of a more positive reality. So I don't know, like maybe the example to ask about here is like, do your kids come home from school ever and say, Daddy, why are you the I don't know, or just like the kinds of ways that they've been exposed through the social environment to a more regressive gender order.
I imagine it's different from some of the
Mm-hmm.
dads who came to this later in their kids'
Mm-hmm.
lives.
Mm-hmm.
I literally started as a stay-at-home dad the minute that maternity leave ran out for my wife and she
Okay.
went back
Okay.
into work.
Sure.
So neither one of my kids have ever known a life where dad
Yeah.
wasn't staying at home with them while mom worked.
Yeah.
Um, as far as, kids at school, my daughter had 3/4 of a year of kindergarten and like a year
Mm-hmm.
of pre-K at a
Oh,
Montessori
okay.
school. So there wasn't a whole lot of comparison for her to make,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. True. It's still pretty young at that
but
age. Yeah.
the closest that has come is there have been times that my daughter has pointed out that it would be nice if I would go to work and mommy could stay home because she'd like to
Mm.
spend more time with mommy.
Sure. Yeah.
But
Sure.
I think that's just missing mom.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. That sounds perfectly positive to me.
And then I explained to her that if daddy goes back to work as a chef, our lifestyle will change significantly.
Sure. Maybe quicker meals at home. Are you like bringing your chef skills to bear on the home kitchen?
Oh, absolutely.
Cool. Cool.
I'm pretty sure you were in Portland and Minneapolis. I'm
Uh-huh.
pretty sure I foisted some sort of dry cured pork product on you.
Awesome. Okay. Cool. I don't remember that exactly, but that's not to say it didn't happen.
I tend to walk around with like salami, pastrami, big chunks of homemade bacon, and just give it out like candy.
I love it. I love it. That's so great. Actually, one study that, if there are some, kind of research interested folks in your community that I should share is we actually did a collaboration with the Gina Davis Institute for Gender Equality in Media. And
Uh-huh.
Gina Davis being a famous actress whose like goal now is kind of more equitable representations of women in film and TV. But, they've also expanded that view to say, okay, it's not just about women, it's about gender equality and more broadly. And so they worked with us on a study of the 20 most popular TV shows with young boys and did kind of just an analysis of who are the characters, which characters, boys or girls, are more likely to, resolve conflicts by fighting, which are more likely to be violent, which are more likely to be caring, which are more likely to, exhibit some of the more traditional gender norms. And there's pretty interesting nuanced findings where there's more and more representation of, for instance, LGBTQ characters in these TV shows, for characters with physical disabilities. And some of the storylines are starting to, to reflect kind of newer ways of sharing in the world. But at the same time, there's a disproportionate just number of male characters versus female or gender minorities. And also, whether as an extension of that or, more overall, it's more likely to be the men who are like in fights and resolving things by, you got to beat him up, and others of, the kind of macho manifestations of what like man up, be a man means. These things are still prevalent in the most popular shows among children. And we've also, like, now there's an even newer study that's about to come out of a similar analysis of the kind of language and content of video game streamers. And I don't know if like folks have kids who are really into watching Twitch or watching like the
Oh
kind of
yeah.
video game streamer celebrities on YouTube. just the kind of, gross macho culture that can come up in the chat rooms sometimes from those games, and even the fact that Fortnite and whatever are still kind of games about killing and violence and so on. I'm not trying to say it's all bad and we should only have video games that are about picking flowers, or like blame video games per se, but just these are more examples of that ethic of either a regressive gender view or a more positive one that our kids are
Let's say
are
the Gina
seeing.
Davis study sounds fascinating. That
Yeah, well,
that
I'll
one's
send it
already
out.
completed.
Yeah, I'll send those
I
out.
would say if you
Let me
can
check on the
link
video
that in
game
the
one.
comments, that
Oh,
would be
for
awesome.
sure,
I'd love to
for
check that
sure.
out.
Yeah, I'll put that in. I'm gonna make a note and put those. Is the video game one out yet? But either one or both of those, I'll put in the
Hmm.
Facebook comments. Cool, good one. Okay, about 20 minutes left. I think we're doing okay on time, and
Yeah.
hope you're appreciating the conversation as it's
Oh,
coming.
absolutely.
Couple more. So above and beyond just paternity leave, of course, it's Action Six is asking our workplaces, and not just from a perspective of, let's be more supportive of our male caregivers. I think that is, of course, an important part of this. You need it to be role modeled by your supervisors. It needs to be like not just that the paternity leave policy is on the books, but actually that men take it and they're encouraged to take it, and it's completely normal within the environment. But we also want to really stand up for workers' rights more broadly and kind of show our alliance with organizing toward a better minimum wage, more like job protections, more generous sick leave, and all of the things that our like labor organizing and workplace organizing peers are asking for. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the decision of who stays home with the kid or who doesn't, it all comes down to the financial comfort,
Hmm.
stability, livelihood of the family in some sense. And to the extent that we've got, so many folks working for corporations where the CEO makes billions and the frontline employees make $10 or less per hour. These are sort of like remnants of those structural injustices that do manifest on what kind of standard of care and equality of care are possible in a home. And it's just horrifying seeing in the United States those lines of cars to get into food shelters because there just simply isn't the income coming in. There just isn't a living wage being paid, or let alone folks losing their jobs as a result of the pandemic. So we're kind of we're in this, and not to say like let's bring in communism or anything, but we're in this capitalist society. You need to have a job to make the bill. You need to like kind of find a way to sell your labor, way that's hopefully a little bit rewarding to you, such that you make enough to sustain your family. That's just the worldview that we live in. And why can't especially like massive multinational wealthy corporations find a way to be more caring to their employees in terms of leave policies, also just in terms of remuneration and benefits and so on. So if you read the full report, and I should say, like each one of these actions is accompanied by like as much evidence as we could gather and like more specific action points or like requests
Hmm.
within the full text of the report. If anyone wants to, sit
Yeah,
after the
well,
kids go
again,
to bed,
if you can link
I
in
absolutely
the
will.
comments like the
Yeah,
full report, I'm sure
yeah,
probably not everybody, but there are
yeah,
some of us who are statistics people who would love to read it.
sure.
And
Yep,
speaking of statistics, one of our members, Brock, asked,
cool,
made a really good point,
sure.
saying, it would be interesting to start seeing reports that show that there are deadbeat mothers and moms who are bad parents too.
Hmm.
For years and years, every time, the term deadbeat dad is out there,
Yeah, yeah.
but there are also, they do exist. There are moms that, walk away from their families. And I mean, there are bad people of every gender all across the
Yeah,
spectrum. I mean, there are just bad people, but you tend not to hear the negatives as much in relation to moms as you do to dads.
it's just,
And
yeah, exactly. It's a matter of like the prevalence of these norms. We have just like an expectation that we paint onto people because of their genders, and then we exhibit this kind of confirmation bias where we only like keep our eyes open to the evidence that supports our worldview, as biased as it may be, and ignore the evidence to the contrary. And we're always trying to do the opposite of that in a report like this and show.
well,
I keep kind of sharing these examples of where like two things are true at the same time. like it is true at the same time that still disproportionately women are stepping up to take care of more unpaid care work than men, but that doesn't mean that that's the case for every single individual woman, every single individual man. And we're kind of calling above and beyond just like, you're a deadbeat, no you're a deadbeat, no you're a deadbeat, like kind of get above the
Well,
battle of the sexes a little bit. And
exactly. One of the things that we
mhm,
talk about a lot is that the judges and politicians that
right.
in this country need to wake up to the fact that it is more than just mom's the better parent. It
Hmm.
needs to be looked at on an individual basis,
Hmm.
as
Hmm.
to in the event that there's a divorce or there's a child custody issue.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
turned 50 in February. In the time that
Hmm.
I grew up, if there was a divorce, it wasn't a question. Mom got custody of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
kids, and dad
yeah,
got visitation every now and then, and that was the
yeah,
end of it.
yeah, yeah,
And as we're moving forward as a society, if dad's the primary caregiver, it wouldn't make sense to me
right, right,
for mom to get full custody and dad to have
right,
visitation.
right, right, right.
And we just need to
Yeah,
get fair parenting and equal parenting being much more accepted, both politically, societally, as well as legally.
yeah. And it's useful that this conversation is coming up under this particular item and where I was talking about just like straight up economic stability and lively economic livelihood of families, because even these debates you're talking about of custody and visitation and like child support, in the end, it's the economy, stupid. It's the money, stupid. Like there's some kind of like overly money focused view that comes into those even judges' decisions and stuff too, where like the amount of contribution that the parent who doesn't get primary custody can provide is often just reduced to, okay, so then you pay this amount of money per month. And to the extent that there are deadbeat folks out there, what that implicitly usually supply means is they can't afford to make those payments, or they're, sometimes maybe they can afford and they're refusing to make those payments. But a lot of the data shows that to the extent that there are quote unquote deadbeats, it's because the payment amount ordered to them exceeds what their actual even income and ability to pay is. And so you just again have this kind of capitalist nightmare where people's contributions are reduced only to dollars and cents, and the expectation doesn't match what actually the minimum wage or anything are pushing for. And so part of what we call for is pretty much in line with what you're talking about. Like, folks have more to offer to their families and their children than just X dollars every month. Can there be shared responsibility for this and this and this tasks, shared responsibility for this and this and this tasks, and somewhat more equal of the work, not only a check? And that seems like kind of in line with what you're talking about.
Hmm.
But yeah, I validate everything that's coming up, while at the same time, like, we try to say like, let's get beyond the battle of the sexes. Like, I don't want it always to be like the men want the women to look bad, the women want the men to look bad. I think like we're pushing for, yeah, equality, like I said at the
Yeah, I
beginning, like
mean,
some
I,
vision of, yeah.
I would like to believe in my heart that, when couples end up getting divorced, and
Hmm.
while I have experience, I don't really. I had a marriage when I was much, much younger.
Sure.
We were married for, God, less than 3 years. No
Okay.
kids, no, I mean, like, it was literally like breaking up with my live-in girlfriend. There was just
Right.
paperwork. Um,
Hmm.
so I don't have any experience in this field, but I would like
Yeah.
to believe that when couples reach this point, that the
Yeah.
most important thing is about the well-being of each other, the children, like
Yeah.
these people are your family,
Yeah.
regardless of what the legal determination is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we all should want what's best for the family.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, it's going to be messy in that scenario, and emotions will be really high and hard to get over. And if you don't see your reality reflected when you hear some jerk like me presenting in a conversation, you can absolutely rightly say, like, wow, this doesn't really show my reality. And yeah, maybe, someone in my position is calling on people to be the bigger person
Mhm.
or whatever. And that's hard to do, kind of the they go low but I go high kind of worldview is hard sometimes to just like grit your teeth and be that way. But I guess that's what we're kind of calling for. And I really appreciate diving in even to the thornier parts of this.
Oh yeah.
Um, let's get one more. Yeah, and then like this is an interesting conversation too, and not to get into just like who did you vote for and this politician is good and that politician is bad, but there are folks who wield inordinate power to make these things happen or prevent these things from happening. You've even got a situation with a Democratic majority in the Senate now where there's just this one guy who's the moderate Democrat who he gets to decide whether like he's going to vote one way or the other way. And so these folks have to be brought to accountability on to what extent they're supporting the kinds of policies that would achieve all the other prior actions that we've been talking about. And I don't mean just that one guy. I mean, this is again a report that's looking worldwide.
Right.
And you even had all of those. And sure, we need to have some nuanced view and it's more complicated, but maybe you would have seen a lot of those media stories where it was like, well, it just so happens that New Zealand and these other five countries with a female head of state seem to be prioritizing like more generous, caring cash stimulus payments to families and to caregivers than the countries led by men in general, and especially those that are led by more like autocratic, macho, men with more macho characteristics. And that's again a little bit essentialist. I'm not trying to say like all women leaders are better than all men leaders,
No.
certainly not. But regardless of the gender of the political leader, I think like they have the role and the responsibility to put forward the changes that we're looking for, and I hope we can be calling and holding them to account, whether it's through reelection or other means, just like straight up advocacy, letter writing campaigns, knocking on the door, whatever, emailing, whatever it needs to be, to live these values. And I think if we're again taking this structural view, that person who holds the pivotal vote in a parliament somewhere is an individual with structural level power, like way
Hmm.
beyond you, Matt, or Brock, or Jonathan, or anybody tuning in. Like as much as you do to be an equal caregiver in the world, you don't have the power of someone to show up on the Senate floor and push the green button instead of the red button and suddenly make, a monthly stimulus amount or something. So that's the final one. And I know it's um, I can guess maybe like where a lot of the political viewpoints in National at Home Dad Network would be, but I expect there to be kind of a diversity of views. But
There's more diversity than you would expect.
sure, yeah,
I know that when I joined, I assumed
hmm
that just in general, the entire organization would be relatively left leaning,
hmm
just because being into that ultra conservative, women should stay home and be subservient, like that doesn't really grok with the stay at home dad. Um,
in
but
theory. But
you
then,
know,
yeah, individual lives are more
right,
complicated than
right,
that.
right, and that's
Yeah,
exactly it. We
yeah,
definitely have some guys that are conservative. We have some guys that
hmm
are liberal.
hmm
Barring the left versus right thing aside, I think one of the most interesting things that has happened recently is that with the last election and Kamala Harris becoming vice president,
mm.
um, officially we have a stay-at-home dad as the second husband
That's right. That's right.
because this man stepped away from his career to
That's
support
right.
his wife's career. So it's kind of interesting because this is one of the first times that we have seen that kind of representation of what
Sure.
we do
Sure.
at that high of a public office.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious to see if that has any effect, especially with the vice president being the president of the Senate. To
Right.
see what kind of effect
Yeah.
that has on the
Yeah.
overall direction politically.
Sure.
But it's just more than anything, it was just the idea of it's interesting to have a female office holder whose husband completely walked away from,
Yeah.
a law career
Yeah. Yeah.
to be there and support his wife. I
Totally.
know that there's a lot of guys in this group who walked away from, relatively successful careers.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, I had a pretty good career as a chef.
Yeah.
I wasn't making doctor money, but you know, I mean,
Sure. Of
I was making
course.
a decent living.
Of
But
course.
in the end, I stepped back to support my wife's career because that was what was best for our family. And it seems that
Yep.
that's kind of what he's done as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I have to say, like on the political lines, one thing I really, really value, and it gives me a lot of inspiration about doing the work on fatherhood, is that it's kind of, if you, and I even think I made this joke at the Minneapolis Home Dad Con that like, one of my early slides was like the swirling black and white lines, like, I'm going to hypnotize all of you guys to be part of the feminist agenda or something. That like, if you come at it with just thinking like, you guys are all like join my feminist cause, join the cause of gender equality, and put those kind of like labels that have some kind of political weight to them on it, it can be a little bit divisive. Well, like, hold on, I'm not here to just be a gender equality champion. I'm not a stay-at-home dad because I want to be a feminist per se. But then like when you get down to what it actually means, that like I want to have a meaningful relationship with my child in a way that is deeper than my dad's or my grandparents' generation, that I want to have an emotional connection with that kid. I want to be there for them when they need me. I want to like be there for the sports games and also be there for the emergency room visit when they fall and, break a bone or whatever. And like to the extent that you can get down to that level where men of your generation, my generation, I think, regardless of the political stripe, want to have a bond with their kids, especially as caregivers, in a way that is pretty unprecedented in prior generations, and that spans the political spectrum. And I think to be able to then enter into a room like Home Dad Con, where there are folks of different political stripe, and have a conversation like this one, is honestly just so much more effective and useful than, frankly, I wind up speaking at a lot of like gender equality conventions and stuff where like everybody in the room already agrees with everything. And I don't know like how useful even that is. We're just kind of preaching to the choir a bit. But the space that you guys have coordinated is just a really particularly powerful one because of that. It's almost like without even knowing it, you're doing like important bipartisan, work toward a better society that works for all political stripes. And I think that's really admirable. And at the same time, I think it would be kind of cool if the second husband were to be a keynote in an upcoming conference or somehow join the network.
As a board member, I will point out, don't think for one second that we have not reached out.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
I know for a fact that a letter was sent by the organization welcoming him to his new position
Awesome.
shortly after the election.
Hmm.
And it is definitely something that we would love to have happen. I mean, it would be awesome if we could have him come out and speak to, us about what it felt like for him
Hmm.
to step away from a career to be literally the second husband.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but again, the last year and a half has been a little different as far as
Hmm.
planning things
Hmm.
go.
Yeah. Totally. Is
But
and is there plan for? I guess I should have checked. Home Dad Con 21. Is it on?
oh yeah, it's on. We
Awesome.
are going to be in Cincinnati, Ohio, which
Cincinnati.
was the original plan for
Cool.
2020.
Yep.
We are in the same location that we were originally, which is at the Riverside Embassy Suites.
Awesome. Yep.
And basically, Embassy Suites was really, really great to us. They were kind enough to allow us to reschedule
Hmm.
by a year because of the whole pandemic thing.
Hmm.
The exact dates, I'm trying to get it right here. The convention begins with our convention eve celebration on Thursday, the 14th of October, and
Okay.
it will run Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We do have
Great.
some guys that are coming in early because apparently we're really close to Kentucky. So there's a group of
Oh,
guys that have rented two 15-person vans and are going on a Bourbon Trail tour,
awesome.
which
I
sounds
love
like
it.
a lot of fun for those who enjoy bourbon.
You guys are the best.
There's a group of us that are going. I want to say it's either Thursday. Yeah, I think it's Thursday during the day. They're driving up to the Air Force Museum
Okay.
where they've got
Yeah.
like, space shuttle and all these really cool planes to look at. But we've got a lot going on. They've just started putting out some of the speaker announcements and the other people that we have coming.
Hmm.
But more than anything, I think it's just going to be a huge plus to everybody this year to actually have an in-person convention because
Yeah.
for so many of us, um, for so many of us, this is a once a year thing where we actually
Hmm.
get to go out and get a break.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um, you
And you're the
know,
majority. You're not like the rare outlier primary
well,
caregiver dad anymore. You're like with your squad.
well, it's one of the most common things that you hear from people when they talk about their first convention. Is one of the most striking things to me was for the first time I spent a day meeting people and not one person asked me, "So what do you do for a living?"
Hmm.
Because in
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
America, in America, the questions that you ask people when you meet them is, "What is your major?" And then once you
Hmm.
graduate college, the question is, "What do you
Hmm.
do for a living?"
What do you do? Yeah. What do you do?
Because
Hmm.
that is how so many people define their identity is based on their job or what they study or the rest of it.
Hmm.
And it's a really different experience. And you having been to two conventions, you
Yeah.
know the feeling. I mean, there are guys that I see once a year that I
Yeah.
consider to be some of my closest friends in the world at this point.
Yeah. For
You
sure.
know, I mean,
Yeah, you just bond in a different way. Yeah, I
yeah,
love it. The brotherhood. It's always called the
it's
brotherhood. Yeah.
yeah, it's going to be really great to actually get together with everybody and see each other and hopefully, knock on wood, Delta variant breakthroughs and all that
Yeah.
will subside, and
Yeah.
those will have the vaccinated guys can get back to be a little bit more face-to-face contact and that type of thing, and
Hmm.
we can all move on and get back to having some in-person enjoyment.
Yeah.
2020 we ended up transferring and doing an online convention,
Oh, cool. Yeah.
a little one day online event that actually went really well. Better than many of us expected,
Awesome.
but it went really well. But again, it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same as being able to hang out and be in that room with
Of
everybody.
course. Yeah, I agree. And to a certain extent, I'm really looking forward to getting back in the office. I mean, uh, not every single day. I think will be more of like a hybrid thing. A couple days here, a couple days there, but just yeah, to be around colleagues and build on the collegial energy. I've been missing it. Speaking of collegial energy, Matt, I just really appreciate the invite and also just all the ways you engaged in the conversation. I felt like we were kind of a tag team
Oh,
on
okay.
this webinar, and it went really great for me. I hope it's been useful from your side as well. And absolutely, like immediately, I'll go um, on the Facebook site and post the links to, of course, the State of the World's Fathers itself, and also those media and video game studies that I mentioned.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of keep my eye on the chat there in the coming
Yeah,
days
that
if
would
I
be
can be
great.
helpful.
And thank you again for coming. I really appreciate it. For the guys next month, I do have a webinar lined up. We have not hammered out the exact date of it yet, but we're going to be discussing a topic that is dear to my heart anyway. My daughter is 7 years old, and the other day I had an interesting thought, and that was the fact that at some point in the next 4 to 6 years, she's going to have her first period, and odds are I'm going to be the one helping her through that experience.
Hmm.
And I don't have any personal experience with that to draw on. So I reached out to a family practice physician that we know, and she is going to come on and talk to dads about how to help your daughters through that time period, which should be interesting for those of us who have daughters, and hopefully it will enable us to all be there in the way that our daughters need us to be there and not end up being like awkward and tongue tied like I am just trying to talk about it now. But look, on behalf of the National At Home Dad Network, we want to thank you. We want to thank the work that Promundo has done, and thank all of you who joined us today. And just everybody, Have a great day.
Thanks again. Totally my pleasure. Bye bye.